taken those times away. Oh, I guess this will be the way. There's no time for beauty, they've taken those times.
Hi guys, it's Angie Bryant from Tales of a New Witch, and I am here to talk about tarot for the Witch's Haven. Let's talk tarot, shall we? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experiences with tarot. I decided that I wanted to read tarot about a year ago, a year and a half ago is when I got my first deck. And I wanted to learn how to read. I had thought, I guess, that tarot is more about fortune telling than anything else. And I wanted to know my future. A lot of people do. Unfortunately, we don't live so much in the present. We always want to know what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future, right? I fall into that category from time to time myself. So yeah, I wanted to read tarot so that I could learn how to tell my future, which doesn't quite work out that way. For those of you that have had readings or who read tarot yourself, it's not a fortune telling tool. It can give you some insights into where things are headed based on a certain situation and based on where you are right now in this moment. And if nothing changes in this moment, then what the possible outcome could be. That's the fortune telling aspect of tarot in my experience. But I love reading tarot. I read tarot not daily, although I do want to build up to that. I just haven't set aside the time for that yet, but I do read tarot a couple of times a week. And I've found, especially when reading for myself, because I do read for myself sometimes, not always. I prefer to have someone else read for me because I do feel like it can sometimes get a little muddled when I'm reading for myself, because I already know what I want the answer to be. And while the cards definitely don't always give you what you want, that doesn't happen to me either. Most of the time, it feels a little bit more clear when it's somebody else's interpretation. So I started out, let's talk about that a little bit. I did start out reading tarot by reading for myself because I wanted to learn the cards. I wanted to know what they meant and how to interpret them. And also, I watched a lot of people that read tarot online, especially on Facebook. I would watch live readings, or I would, try to find those posts where people were offering to read cards and read their interpretations of the cards. That, to me, helped a lot with me learning how to read myself, was by seeing how others read. Not that my style is in any way, shape, or form like someone else's, but seeing how other people did it helped it click a little easier for me, I think. And then I also thought that I needed to memorize all the cards because I didn't want to look it up in the book every time I, pulled a card. So I actually bought a book about reading tarot for beginners. And I started, and that book suggested that you take one card every day, pull a card, and you write down what that card meant, your first impressions of that card, and what the traditional meaning of that card was. And I did that a little bit, but I was still struggling. Every card I pulled up, it just was a blank for me. I just didn't understand why I wasn't getting anything from the cards. So I actually started looking on Facebook for someone that maybe could teach me the trick to it all, because it doesn't seem to be working for me. And luckily I found someone who, was available to help me. And the biggest piece of advice that she gave me on reading tarot was to throw out the book. She learned how to read tarot without a book at all. And that was her biggest advice to me, was to let go of what they're supposed to be, what those meanings are supposed to mean on those cards, and what do I think those meanings are? What does that card say to me? So now this was scary. It was scary, and I knew I was going to have a hard time with that. So I literally did throw out the books. All the little pamphlet books that were in there, the book that I bought, I threw them away because I knew I would keep going back to them. I wasn't going to trust myself. I was going to keep looking it up. So I threw that out. So my temptation for doing that was then gone. And I found that the traditional decks, just in the beginning, now I am better with those now, but a year and a half ago, those traditional images on the decks didn't speak to me as well. I think because I kept expecting to have that traditional interpretation, and I wasn't getting that just by looking at the cards. I got all of my decks online so far, all 3 decks that I read from, and I read from 3 decks right now. I originally had 5, but the 2 other decks that I no longer use are more traditional in their imagery, and those were the ones that I was struggling with. So I originally bought 3 decks, the 2 traditional and the one that I liked because of the artwork. And I'll pull that out and show you guys. And so this deck, I saw one card, literally one card out of the deck, and was like, boom, that was my deck, right? But it's not a tradition. It is in the traditional sense, as in 78 cards, the 22 major arcana, and the 4 suits. It has all of that, going for it, just like your regular traditional tarot deck. But the imagery on the cards on this deck is not traditional, but this is what works for me. I am drawn to decks by their artwork. That's where I get my messages, I think, is in the artwork. So this is the back of these cards, and here are some of the images, and it's, as you can see, this is the death card. It doesn't even say the death on it. So that was another thing that was helpful, I think, for me in these cards, because I looked at it and I didn't even know that it was a death card. I was just reading the interpretation that I was getting from the images. This is the 8 of Swords. Again, just different imagery. The artwork was really what spoke to me in this. And I found that, I guess you could say, the way I read the cards is like a form of channeling. It's the cards, I don't know, like I look at this image and it tells a story in my mind. And sometimes these stories are 1-2 sentences. It's quick, it's easy, so this was actually the image that I saw online. This red bird with the lady. It's actually the 5 of Cups, and I still can't tell you what that is traditionally supposed to signify. I get my messages through these cards based on how it speaks to me, is the only way I can describe it. But this card, this image right here, is what drew me to this deck. And when I saw the red bird, I instantly felt like I had to have that deck. And this has been my favorite deck. It is still my favorite deck a year and a half later. It was the first deck that I felt connected to, that I could read, that I felt that I could read for others. This was also the first deck that I ever read for others with. And it has been very, very accurate for me. And my feedback with reading for this deck is also very accurate. So it has definitely been, this is how I read. This is just going to be how it is for me, is this form of channeling a message, but based on the artwork of the deck. Until recently, I just kept it like this, stored on my altar or next to my bed, because that is one thing that I do with all of my decks when I first got them, was I slept with them under my pillow, or I laid them next to my, on my bedside table, and would put crystals on them as well. And that is how I found that I can help connect to my decks a little bit quicker, as well as handling them, putting my energy into the cards by touching them, by looking at the cards, by shuffling them. But then not that long ago, I found this box online. Isn't that adorable? Love it. Got it. I got it. It was actually a 2-pack of boxes, and it fits perfectly my deck. So that's where my favorite deck goes, in this box. It's nice. I have tattoos, as you can see, so I like tattoo imagery as well. And this tarot deck was the second deck that I started connecting with. And this one I bought on purpose because of the tarot, or the tattoo imagery. One of the things about this deck that actually took me a little longer to connect with the messages than my first deck was because it is a little bit more traditional. The Six of Swords here, the Knave of Wands. The imagery is a little more traditional, and so it did take me a little longer to connect with, but I have. The decks have different personalities, which I am enjoying. For instance, with my favorite deck, this is called actually the Nicolette Cecilini. I'm probably butchering that name. I'm sorry, but Nicolette Cecilini tarot deck. I found it on Amazon. You can look it up, the images, or the butchered name that I did. I'm sorry. But with this deck, the Cecilini deck, I guess I'll just call it that from now on so we can know what I'm talking about. But that deck is very, I feel like it's nicer, if that makes sense. It not that it won't tell me when I'm wrong, because it absolutely will bring that up. I've had a few readings for myself and others when I was like, ooh, that's not good. So it definitely does that, but it's a gentler tone to it, I believe, where the tattoo tarot is more black and white. It's just yes or no. Not a lot of extra goes into that. So that's, and I don't read reversals with the Cecilini tarot deck, but I do with the tattoo ones. And that's just something that you feel out when you're reading tarot. That's just, but then later on, when I felt more comfortable and I wanted to start reading reversals, the Cecilini deck it just never made sense on the reversal. And I started seeing people talk about how some people don't read reversals, or they only read them for certain decks. So then I was like, oh, well, then that would make sense. That's why this is just not working for me. This deck is just not meant for me to read it in reverse. But the tattoo tarot, I can. It did seem to flow in the reversals. So, just the little quirks of how decks will end up being for you. The more time you spend with them, you feel these different personalities that they have. So for me, reading tarot or getting a reading, which I've gotten several readings from different people. I really enjoy getting tarot readings. I spend a lot of time in my head and I overanalyze and overthink things. So for me, having someone read cards for me, it's stuff that I'm already thinking of, maybe considering. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I know that path, that route, that answer that I'm looking for. But because I spend so much time over analyzing it, I'm not making decisions. It takes me a bit to make a decision on things. So for me, getting a tarot reading is that confirmation maybe that I'm looking for. It's that push that I need to make that choice, especially when it comes from someone else. When I'm reading it, not as much, but when someone else comes out with the same thing I was already considering, I was already thinking, it helps to settle my analyzing mind. It helps to settle it. I spoke a little bit about in the beginning that I came into this thinking that tarot was fortune telling. And while I think it can give you an aspect of the future. That's not how I see tarot. That's not how I feel the readings are when I'm reading or when I'm getting a reading. For me, tarot is about tapping into something in your mind that was already there, that maybe you pushed aside, you buried down deep, you're just not acknowledging, or in my case, over-analyzing, so you keep going back and forth with the yes-nos. Tarot brings that to the surface. The messages that come through is like shining a light on something that's on your mind already, something that's already going on for you that you're just not focusing on. That, to me, is what tarot does for me, and that's why I read tarot for myself and for others. I hope you will come back and subscribe to The Witch's Haven and see some more of this great new channel that we're starting, where we're going to have different topics every 10 days to 2 weeks, and lots of different witches and coming in and giving their own perspective, their own experiences on these topics. So stick around. This is going to be a really great new idea. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye for now.